Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are joined by bestselling author and screenwriter Richard Walter. He's written a new novel out from Heresy Press called Deadpan. It says here it's a groundbreaking satirical novel wielding comedy as a weapon against bigotry and using mirth as a balm to heal the wounds of division, intolerance, and anger. This novel not only invokes the legacy of Mark Twain, but also exemplifies the tradition of Jewish humor by deconstructing stereotypes and exposing them to withering laughter. Um, the I was when I first saw this come across my desk, I knew it was immediately interesting, but the person behind the story is also interesting as well. So Richard Walters, a author of best-selling fiction and nonfiction, and he led the screenwriting program at the film school at UCLA for several decades, and obviously has written lots of fun scripts and been all over the world and all this type of thing. He has a podcast on Substack and a blog on Medium. He's on Twitter and Facebook. And in this conversation, we're going to find out more about the book and his whole career. So, welcome, Richard, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Cameron. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you for coming on by. So, why don't we begin from the beginning, since we already kind of know a little bit about you? Why don't you tell us about Deadpan and why you wrote it?
Okay. Um, uh, the it's funny when I submitted this manuscript to Bernard Schweitzer, who is the founder and director of its publisher, Heresy Press. It's a new publisher. He read it and sent me an email saying that just praising it to the skies. It was as if my mother was responding, except I don't think my mother would have liked it as much as he seemed to. And among other things that he said was that it appeared. It just flowed so smoothly. He sat down and read right through it in a single afternoon, and it flowed so smoothly, and it was so well formed and shaped that it appeared as if I had written it in a single afternoon. The fact is, I've been working on this book for literally a half a century, almost a half a century. I came up with the notion in the mid '70s. I was actually visiting with friends, and suddenly I got this idea, which if I was a professor, as you mentioned, at UCLA for over 40 years. I'm in retirement now. I'm in my seventh year retired. If I were still a professor on campus at UCLA, I would say that Deadpan is an homage to Franz Kafka. But since I'm retired, I'll say I stole it from Kafka. There's a short story by Kafka that I've never met anybody who doesn't know the story. It's called The Metamorphosis. And it's a story about a man wakes up one morning to discover that he's a bug or a beetle or an insect, depending upon the translation from the original German. And I just asked myself, what else could you wake up as? What if you woke up one morning and you were not who you thought you were, but you were somebody else, like, for example, a bug or a beetle or an insect? And what I came up with was the world's most popular stand-up comedian. Imagine one day you wake up and everybody responds to you not as who you believe you are, but they've got a different name for you, and it's the name of the most famous comedian, the most popular, the most beloved comedian, stand-up comedian on the planet. Um, and since so many comedians are Jews, I decided to make the comedian a Jew. And since I was writing this in the perhaps in the mid '70s, during the '70s there were a couple of crises that caused oil shortages. In 1973 was a war in the Middle East, the Yom Kippur War, which caused embargoes of oil. And then again in 1979, there was the Iranian Revolution with the ouster of the Shah. And once again, there were gas lines. People were waiting in line to get gasoline at gas stations all around the world, including the United States. And there was an outbreak of, at that time, of anti-Semitism. I remember in '73 reading about oil storage facilities along roadsides in Oklahoma and other states where oil is found, being spray painted with anti-Semitic epithets like "burn Jews, not oil," deport, dump Kissinger. Henry Kissinger was the Secretary of State under Nixon at that time, and Jewish and so on. So it occurred to me to make the previous identity of this comedian a something of an anti-Semite, not a raging a terrorist, rapist, but just somebody who's vaguely anti-Semitic and he's a Buick dealer in rural West Virginia. And nobody's buying Buicks, gas guzzling Buicks. His business is failing. And they're not buying gas guzzling Buicks because of the gas situation, the fuel shortage. And so he's kind of blaming the Jews for this. He kind of goes along with that. So what you have is something of an anti-Semite who spends a day in the life of a Jew. That was the genesis of the book. That's how I really got started on it.
All right. That's quite impressive. And I think given as the press release says, the rise of anti-Semitism as of late, how timely to today as well.
Yes, I wish it weren't so timely, quite frankly. It has
There's
become
that.
quite timely. You know, there's all kinds of expressions about Hollywood. My favorite is from Dorothy Parker, who said years and years and years ago that Hollywood's the one place on earth where you could die of encouragement. I had so much encouragement regarding Deadpan over the years. What I never had was a nickel or an offer of a contract until suddenly now. And it had something to do with the fact that there has fallen over the publishing industry a kind of a plague. People are afraid to publish controversial stuff. I am I was a professor of screenwriting, and I have written for the screen for many years. Deadpan is actually my sixth published book. It's my third published novel. My last novel was a Los Angeles Times bestseller. It earned out its advance in its first printing. It went to multiple printings in cloth. That's what the publishing industry calls hardcover books, and trade paper, the kinds of paperbacks that are sold in bookstores. Um, and my nonfiction books, I have three books from Penguin Random House on screenwriting. They've been in print for 35 years, and I've sold over 100,000 copies of those books. On top of all of that, there have been reckonings in the nation over the last number of years relative to race and gender and sexuality. All of those reckonings, in my view, welcome and long overdue. There is in publishing a professed desire to publish works by writers who are members of marginalized populations, and I am a writer at the intersection of ableism and ageism. I'm I'm somewhat mobility challenged. I walk with an orthopedic cane. I am hearing impaired, and I'm elderly. So I thought that I just couldn't miss with with Deadpan. But my own agents who sold my previous book and made some money on it would not even respond to a query from me about it. I wrote to 50 agents, and only three responded at all three of them with polite, perfunctory turndowns. Um, I happened to be reading the column, an op-ed piece by a New York Times columnist, Pamela Paul, and she was commenting on what has happened in the publishing industry, that people are afraid to publish controversial material by people like me, and I'd pretty much given up on it when I read Pamela Paul's piece, and she was interviewing Bernhard Schweitzer, who is the founder and director of Heresy Press. So I tracked them down on the internet. Like all publishers, and there's a website. There is a portal for submissions, and on a Friday, I submitted, according to their protocols, a little bio of me, a little bit about myself, a bit of a synopsis, a few sentences describing the book Deadpan, and then the first chapter. That's all they wanted to see, and that was on a Friday. The Monday morning after that weekend, I got an email from Bernard from Heresy Press asking to see the rest of the manuscript. So I sent it to him the next day, Tuesday, and Thursday, 2 days later, he sent me an email accepting the manuscript and offering me a contract. That was almost a year ago, and now the book has been launched this very month. And I'm busy trying to promote it, trying to get people interested in it. People do seem to be responding well so far.
Yes, I was thinking about you saying that the publishing industry is averse to publishing controversial things. The stakes are so much higher than they used to be. Um, Thanks mostly to social media because, back in the day, a controversial book might not, you know, it might have a few thousand readers or it might get an underground cult following, and then that's kind of the end of it. Now with social media, publish the wrong thing that's around the world in a second.
Yes, and it's funny too because I do not myself participate in social media. I have a manager who kind of handles all of that for me. But I do publish a blog post. I post a blog piece once a week, and I also podcast twice a week. And I do have thousands of followers, and I would have thought that that would have, excited more interest among publishers and a greater willingness to publish the book, but no deal, no deal. I quite agree. The whole landscape of communications has changed here in the digital era.
Yeah, no, it is definitely quite a shift. Well, the book sounds very very exciting, and I imagine the character has all sorts of twists and turns discovering, you know, what it's like to be in the other half. So,
Yeah, no, I like to think that uh, there's just two kinds of literature, two kinds of movies. There's a lot of talk about genre. I think there's only two genres: good movies and bad movies, good books and bad books. Um, and a good book, a good movie is one that is engaging. And a bad one is one that's boring. We had a hugely successful program at UCLA. Our students in that program wrote 11, maybe 12 pictures for Steven Spielberg. Um, in my last 10 years at UCLA, there were five screenplays written by alumni from the program that were nominated for Oscars for Best Screenplay, and three Oscars were also won. I've read, there are a few people on this planet, if any at all, who have read as many screenplays as I have. Again, I had over 1,000 students writing screenplays over the decades, starting in the mid 70s. And I will tell you that if you read the first top of the page of the first page, page one in a screenplay, and you actually want to read the rest of that page, and you do read the rest of the page, and you get to the bottom of the page, and you actually want to turn the page, it's unusual. It really is unusual, and I think the key to especially new writers achieving success is to make it engaging, make people want to read that. Deadpan opens with this guy shutting down his business, and suddenly he finds himself in a Vegas main room, being shoved on stage, and as he tries to explain to the people who he is, that he's just a Buick dealer. His name is not the name that they're calling him, and the name that they announced him as when they introduced him, that he's actually a Buick dealer from West Virginia. Everybody kind of like says that along with him, as if he's become someone, a comedian whose routine is to claim that he's the person whom he really believes that he is. And everybody who's looked at that has, just about everybody, has responded positively. They want to know more about that. They get engaged by that, and it seems to carry them through the book. At least that's what people tell me.
No, no, I said when I was shopping my first novel for agents, I said my first mistake is that the murder is too far back in the book. The
Uh-huh.
murder happens at the end of the first third. It's about 70 pages in, and it
Hmm.
probably would have drawn more interest if it had been in the first 50.
It,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah, and well, because it's you need that, that thing that draws people in, right away. And I'm always, when I'm writing or even when I'm looking at other people's work, I'm always looking for okay, even if it's something small and incidental, what's gonna grab us into this world sort of thing. And when I was working on my thesis project, I just did my MFA. I graduated a year ago now. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. Uh, my thesis project was basically Downton Abbey set in the antebellum South, and it's called the Sweetgrass Saga. And I learned from my mistake. And first 10 pages in, we already have a juicy runaway slave narrative. Doesn't actually really contribute to the main part of the story. It's a subplot, but it's drama and it gets us in. Like I learned I learned my lesson.
Well, it's funny
So
because there's a book. I'm sorry I can't remember the name of the author. She's a librarian, um, and when people would come into her library, a woman might come in and say, "I'm having trouble with my adolescent daughter. She's acting out. Do you have a book on psychology that might help me work this out?" And she said, "I do have a book on psychology, and I also have a novel that deals with that subject, and I've also got a memoir that deals with it." And she came up with this book. She became famous for her book lists. She would give lists of books that people ought to read regarding a particular issue. And the book is called Book Lust. And she has a theory, a formula, which is she doesn't believe you should have to immediately get grabbed. Can't authors take some time setting things up and so on? And so her protocol says until you're 50 years old, you have to read the first 50 pages of the book. And if you're not engaged by it at that time, you can quit. Then for every year over 50, you can deduct one page So when you're 60, for example, you only have to read 40 pages. I can't wait till I'm 100 years old and I won't have to read a damn thing, you know.
You can just skip to page
But
51 and start reading.
especially for new writers, you
Yeah.
do need to engage quickly.
No, no, I knew what the problem was when I queried, got a response within 24 hours, and was asked for full manuscript. I think one had a sample, one hadn't. I was kind of like, okay, they're interested, but then in the media, I'm kind of like, but as I'm sending it, I'm like, I know what the problem is. They're looking for what's the hook, and
Hmm.
there's and the problem is there has to be this a bit of a build up to make the murder make sense. Um, and I modeled it off of a book by Jhumpa Lahiri called The Lowland, which has the same problem. The murder's actually in the middle of that book. It
Hmm.
you wait quite a while to get to the big moment sort of thing. Um, and I'm kind of like I know what's hot right now and what's selling and all this type of thing, and I know what my problem is.
Hmm.
Um, so I kind of, I modern and I blame honestly film and television for that. Everyone's used to having, the thing that happens in the first 15 minutes or in the first segment, all this type of thing. And so, and I told you, I said film and television have had huge impacts on literature. It changes how we write, it changes how we write dialogue, it changes how we lay out books. That's why I think people find pre-television books so inaccessible.
Hmm.
It's so hard to read Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice because those books don't follow that. I mean, Hemingway, he'll take 3 paragraphs to describe how the wind is blowing,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that's for when he was writing, that was an entirely inappropriate, thing to do.
Yes.
Novels of manners are a bunch of hubbub about some woman trying who doesn't want to get married to a guy who desperately wants to marry her, and
Hmm.
there's not it's all very subtle and it's not terribly flashy, and it's like, oh my God, I can't marry him, have you seen his shoes, like, I mean, and so that's just, and it is, that's not it lacks the excitement and verve of film and television. And
Hmm.
so that's, but then of course, publishers being publishers, when we figured that what all y'all had done, we then started to write all of our books to follow your format because that's what people were used to.
Well, it's actually, I think, easier for that reason to write novels and to have written them years ago. There's a famous letter from Hemingway to his editor, the legendary Maxwell Perkins. I think that Hemingway was in Cuba at the time, and he was working on The Old Man and the Sea. And he wrote this long, long letter to Perkins. It went on and on and on, like for 9 pages. And at the end, he signs off saying, "Well, that's about it for now, Max. Please forgive me for writing such a long letter. I didn't have the time to write a short one." It actually takes more time to do what writers have to do, which is to select and choose, and especially to throw away. As I've grown as a human being and as a writer, I used to think that writing a novel or a screenplay, where you had kind of a narrative line and you had to put stuff up onto it. And I've come to believe it's the opposite of that. You really have to take stuff away from a story that already exists to find it. I never knew a writer or who wasn't surprised by twists and turns in the storyline, by lines of dialogue that the characters seem to invent by themselves. So instead of a construction, it's kind of a taking apart and finding. And finally, late in my life, where I where I am now, I think it's not so much even about finding the story as letting the story find you. But it is a great challenge. You're so right. And Dickens and the writers that you cite. the Netflix of the era was literature, and there was less distraction and less competition, and you could do stuff like that. In a screenplay, a description of a waterfall is as follows: waterfall. If you go on about the mist that
Yes,
cascades off the
necessary.
craggy granite rock face, the rainbow images, in the foam and so on, the reader is going to be thinking, amateur, amateur.
No, no, it's yeah, I mean those all are decisions that are made later on by not the writer. And that what I always say film is not a writer's medium.
Mm.
It's a director's medium, but it's not a writer's medium. Um and I yeah, which is was why I never did film and television. Is because especially I remember I went to a screenwriting writing conference in LA, and there's this big conference where they go and they buy ideas and screenplays, and it's like in this huge convention hall and sort of thing. And I watched someone get paid $11,000 for an idea. No pages written, and a concept, an idea, a short, two lines, $11,000. And I said, "Oh yeah, this isn't for me." Like if I have an idea and I want to do something, I want to see it all the way through. I
No,
could never sell, an idea for $11,000 that's
mhm.
never going to ever see the light of day. I mean, I have a trouble being like, you wrote a film and they bought it and they're never going to make it. That's a struggle to me. Like, that's insane. Um,
Yeah,
and
no,
so
I think the idea is the single most overappreciated, overvalued part of movies and all dramatic narratives. Um, when If you have a good idea, if you have a really great idea for a movie, that's all you've got. I mean, what remains
yeah.
after that? Everything. The characters need to be invented, the incidents, the anecdotes, the dialogue. The dialogue needs to be fun to listen to all for itself because it's peppy and punchy and provocative, and those are just the P's. And it can't just be all for itself. In addition to that, it also has to be consistently moving the story forward and expanding the readers or the viewers' appreciation of the characters. It's funny, we talk about ideas. This past week, in the last week or so, a writer died. I think his name was David Seidler. And he wrote, among other things, the Oscar winning screenplay was the best picture and best screenplay called The King's Speech 15 or 20 years ago. Um, and the idea, remember, this is an Oscar winning movie, Oscar winning screenplay. And here's the idea: a man stutters, but he has to give a speech. So he works with a speech therapist on the speech and he gives the speech. I mean, if somebody told you that, you said what if you said to somebody that's an Oscar-winning screenplay that's going to win the Oscar for best movie and best screenplay? You'd figure,
Yeah.
crank up the lithium on this guy's drip. He's crazy.
But I
I'll
mean, at the
also
same
tell you.
time, though,
Let me
some of
just
the
tell you.
best films have the most simple premises. Taxi Driver, a man saves prostitute from pimp.
Well,
You
well,
know,
listen to this. My students, I was bragging earlier about them having written movies with Steven Spielberg. They've written a lot of other movies, including a movie called Stand and Deliver. In fact, that movie was written by a couple of UCLA students and then produced by one and directed by another. The editor, it was a real UCLA Film School mafia production, and it's based in reality on a Jaime Escalante, a Bolivian who was teaching in high school in East Los Angeles to these Latino students. And he was a math teacher. and he taught calculus. And they took the Educational Testing Service, the National Calculus Exam, and they did very, very well. And back in Princeton, where the testing service is, they were suspicious of that. They thought that these Latino kids could not have learned calculus. They must have cheated on the test, so they made them take it again. And they sent out proctors, a whole team of proctors, and they put each kid who was taking the test in a classroom by her or himself or themselves, with a proctor sitting there so that there couldn't be any cheating. And all the kids, they passed the test again, and they showed that they really could learn calculus. Now, my former student, Tom Muska, who produced the film and also co-wrote it with Ramon Menendez, who was the director of the film. I ran into him at around the time that the movie came out. It was very, very successful. Edward James Olmos, who played the protagonist, was nominated for an Oscar that year for his performance. And Tom, who was from New Jersey and talked like this, he said, "Hey, Richard, imagine me pitching this picture to the town. The climax is these kids take a math test twice. I mean, it sounds crazy, and yet it was a brilliant, brilliant film. One of my favorite movies. It's a really, really wonderful movie. So ideas are not important. What's important is story. That's what really, really matters, and that's what we preached at UCLA, and that's what I think every writer has to do. When people ask me, what were you trying to do with your new novel, Deadpan? The answer is I was trying to tell a good story.
No, I think that is the first imperative, and then story gives us opportunities to do something or say something about, all the other stuff, the social commentary and all this type of thing comes after. If you
Yes,
don't have a good story, then that's the
that's right. That's
difficult
right.
part, with Sweetgrass Saga, I wanted to write a sweeping Southern epic, and my second reader in grad school was like, "Oh, well, yes, you've done it," sort of thing. Um, it definitely needs some trim work. There's a couple places where I'm kind of like, "That's nice, but unnecessary. We can move on."
Mhm.
And but you have to first have a good story. So with that in mind, film is broken, in case you hadn't noticed.
I'm sorry,
Film.
film is.
The film industry is broken, shattered, really. Um, what happened?
Well,
It
it's
seems like the whole
funny.
project's gone under.
I believe actually good things have happened, and bad things. But for one thing, uh, the two major changes have occurred. One is that production costs have plummeted, have crashed. I know that they make movies that cost a couple of $100 million, but you can make a movie now, on your own phone. A matter of fact, a writer in New England, I'm sorry, in New Zealand, sent me a movie that he made, that cost $10,000. That was the budget for the movie, and it looks like a really, really wonderful production with drone shots that used to be crane shots that used to cost five and six and $8,000, now cost like $75. Everybody's walking around with a movie camera in their pocket, and so there were a zillion more movies being made. The other major change is distribution. It used to be, there was seven television channels and seven major movie studios, American movie studios, and now there are hundreds and hundreds of them. It used to be that American film was world film. up to about 25 years ago, films made outside the United States, among those films, only 1 in 10 was shown outside the country of its origin. But all American films, all Hollywood movies were shown everywhere around the world. Now we're seeing, my wife and I, we can tolerate about an hour of television at night in front of the flat screen. So we'll either watch a series that we get into and watch an episode each night, or we'll watch like half of a movie and then watch the next half the following night. We've seen material from Norway and Indonesia and France and Spain and England and China, all around the world, and I think that's got to be a good thing. So much it's so much easier to and cheaper to make a film now that there are many, many more of them. And now that means there are many more lousy ones. Most of them are pretty bad. I think most art is not very good. You know, we go into a museum. I was in New York, and I was at my favorite museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I didn't see one painting, I didn't see one work of sculpture that wasn't timeless and eternal and that didn't deserve its place there at the Met. And people get the impression from great museums like that all paintings are great, all sculpture is great, but movies, television especially, are not consistently great, and they don't understand that for every painting that hangs at the Met, there's 8,000 stupid, useless, worthless amateur paintings. God bless those amateurs for making the paintings, for being creative, for reaching and stretching and taking risks. But it's really not worth most of the work is not worth the time and the attention and the consideration of anybody else other than the person who made the movie. But there are also good ones, and just as there are more bad ones, there are more good ones. There's so much material that is worthy. You really can't keep up with it. I think, furthermore, one of the
Television
problems is,
suffers from that especially.
well, because it's in your face now, it's popular. There hasn't been the time for the dropping away of the bad stuff. Um, there's another problem, which is that it's so cheap now, and we're not stuck in the with streaming and with cable. We're not stuck with the half hour, the hour, or the 2 or 3 hour movie made for television. People can go on and on and on, and that's what they do. Everything is too long. Oppenheimer, I'm sorry, it's too long. Flower Moon, everything Scorsese does is too long. You know, I like to, Cameron, I am a college professor, retired now, but I was a college professor for over 40 years, and I have an occupational hazard. Sometimes I stop people in the street. I just stop strangers in the street and I give them a pop quiz. And now I've got one for you and for the listeners who are tuned into us. And it's multiple choice, just three answers, three choices, A, B, C. How long should a movie be? A, too long. B, too short. C, exactly the right length. The answer is B, too short. You should be sorry when that's over. I hope that when people read Deadpan, my current novel, my new novel, that when they get up to the end of it, they're sorry that it's over, that they wish they'd spent more time with it. If it's just the right length, that's too long. There's no such
I
thing
have
as
I
just
have
the
a
right
thing with
length.
that in my own writing. I'm a very concise writer. I am not prone to a lot of detail. In fact, oftentimes, if there's one thing that I is probably sometimes lacking is, you know, detail and all this type of thing. That was when I was doing my thesis project in grad school. That was the complaint I got back from professors the most. And they, and I had one advisor who had me buy a cookbook from 1861 because he really wanted to know what exactly the food was that they were eating. And
Hmm.
I'm like, I don't really think that that matters. But it yes. No, I think yes, I agree. Leave them wanting more, as we would say in the theater.
Yes.
Um, and that is, and I also kind of like, don't insult the reader. They have imaginations of their own, and that's very important. With
Yes.
film, I
Yes.
always like to see if it passed the drive home test. Back in the day when I went to movies all the time with my friends, I'll rarely do that anymore. Um, I would always, but when in college we'd see a couple movies a weekend, sort of thing. And so I was always curious if I'm walking, and it's a lot of these, movie plexes, there's quite a walk from the theater back out to the parking lot. And so I'd be going through and I'd be kind of like, I always say you can tell a film is good if you're talking about it walking out of the theater. It's really good if you're talking about it on the drive home. I know a film has bombed when I'm talking about something else by the bathrooms. Like between the theater
Hmm.
door and the bathroom, if I'm kind of like, where should we eat? Where should we go? Let's do that. Because it clearly has already left our minds. It had no impact on us
Well,
whatsoever.
imagine you're walking past a movie theater and the doors suddenly open and everybody streams out. They've just finished that movie and they're leaving the movie.
Yeah.
And imagine that they're all sobbing, they're all weeping. Um, you might say to yourself, wow, that must be some sad movie. It made everybody so sad. I don't want to see that. No, you would immediately get in
No,
line to
you
see
walk up.
that
I need
movie.
a ticket for whatever they just came out of. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
of course. Right.
Again, I really think it all that matters really is provoking in the audience or the reader feelings, passion. And if you can do that, it doesn't need, you don't need to make people feel good. You just have to make them feel. Imagine if you were walking down the street and you encountered somebody, you happened to see somebody who was wobbling and short of breath, and it looked like they might fall down, and you were so generous a person that you took their elbow and you led them to let's say there's a bench near a bus stop where people can sit down waiting for the bus, and you sit the person down and you say, maybe I should call 911. And they say, no, no, no. They're catching their breath. It's okay. I'm all right. And thank you so much for helping me out. All that happened was I saw this movie. I just came out of this movie. It was so upsetting. It was so disturbing. It scared me. It upset me. Well, would you say to yourself, "Oh, I sure don't want to see that"? The heck you would. You'd get in line right then and there to see that movie. The point is to be in a safe place to feel unsafe emotions. Remember, the movie is fake, but the emotions are completely real.
Yeah, I don't know. I, I feel like we have this problem presently in the film industry. One, it's hemorrhaging people. Everyone seems to be laid off. Um, and we have, as you said, more content, less quality. Um, and I also I think there's a very popular opinion, especially on the political right, that Hollywood is simply out of touch with the everyday person. And I don't, to which I say, was Hollywood ever in touch with the everyday person?
Right. That's what I
You
was
know,
immediately was
oh, they're
thinking.
out of touch. And then I said, when is that, if, when has that ever been true?
Hmm.
If you'd ask the everyday person if they should make Rebel Without a Cause or Easy Rider, they would have said, no, of course not. That's
Hmm.
subversive, they would
If
say.
you want to be in touch with the everyday person, you don't need to go to the movies. You don't need to turn on the TV. You can just walk out into the street. and be in touch with the everyday person. It's like
Yeah, but I feel
I
like there is
say,
this sort of idea that Hollywood is not expressing the values of the country or regular people. It's too coastal, it's too elite, all this sort of thing.
well,
And I think that's interesting.
there is something to be said for that. But again, I don't think it's funny. I will read I work as a consultant in screenplays. I'm a script doctor. That's what I was doing with my students at UCLA, and I do that also professionally in the business over the years with private clients. And I'll read a bunch of dialogue where there are a lot of vocalized pauses. Look, listen, I mean, and so on. And it's kind of all over the place. And I'll say, well, this is all over the place. You got to get to the point. And the writer will say to me, yeah, but that's the way people really speak. Well, is it the way people really speak? It is. So what's wrong with that? Two things are wrong with that. One is what I just said a moment ago. You don't need to go to the movies to hear the way people really speak. You can get that out in the street. You can go into the 7-Eleven, a perk. You'll hear the way people really speak. What's the other thing that's wrong with that? Well, it's the worst thing that you can do in any form of creative expression. It's boring. How do people really speak? Hey, how you doing? Oh, pretty good. What about yourself? Oh, not so bad. A beautiful day today, isn't it? Yeah, but they say it's going to rain tomorrow. I mean, this is the way people really speak. You want a cup of coffee?
Yeah.
How do you
No, the
take
same thing
that?
as in books. Well-written dialogue does not make excellent spoken conversation. It doesn't.
Well,
But even in film, we want Norma Shearer to say, I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille, because it's concise, it's succinct, it has impact in a way that ordinary conversation doesn't, nor does it need to. I don't need to have an emotional moment saying hi, hello. I do need to have an emotional moment watching a woman walk down a flight of stairs having a nervous breakdown, surrounded by the entirety of the LA Police Department. That I need emotional impact.
I agree.
That was yeah, it's the same thing with all sorts of moments Mommy Dearest, no, I think one of the best I think scenes in cinema, is Faye Dunaway screaming "Don't fuck with me, fellas." That's and also the way it's shot, the way they shot that scene is in that very kind of old school close up all the time on the face of the actress style that had kind of fallen out of fashion by the time that film was made, and they, kind of did it that way, and yeah, but there's all those iconic lines don't make any sense in ordinary normal conversation, nor do they need to. But they're great lines because not they're memorable and they have that emotional impact.
Hmm.
We say that with the first line of books all the time. Like my favorite, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. We were somewhere outside Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs began to take hold. In fact, I caused quite a stir. I think it was my second semester in my MFA when I quoted that first line, and I was kind of like, yeah, yeah, someone who like used to be into drugs. I'm like, what drugs? Where are we getting high? I'm in. I'm sold. What? Tell me more. Sort of thing. And everyone was you know, all aflutter because of a drug reference. And I'm kind of like, I
Hmm.
thought this was an art school, but whatever. Um, and so yeah, it all always, call me Ishmael. They have, all this wonderful, wonderful, impact sort of thing. But those are not necessarily things you would necessarily say in normal conversation. Maybe call me Ishmael. That might come up. But no one is gonna stand in the line at Walmart and say we were somewhere outside Barstow on the edge of the desert when the trucks began to take
There's a
hold.
writer, Peter DeVries, who wrote a book that opens with "Call me, comma Ishmael, call me Ishmael, and then it's Ishmael's agent is trying to get him to call him on the phone. I'll tell you something. I went to
Yes.
USC film school in the 60s. My classmates went on to own Hollywood, except for one, George Lucas, who owns Marin County up in Northern California. But last week I caught up with John Milius. I haven't seen him in years and years and years. A famous writer director. He wrote Apocalypse Now. He wrote and directed the Conan the Barbarian and Big Wednesday and on and on and on and on. And the opening, I remember years and years ago, he gave me the screenplay before the movie was made for Apocalypse. And there are a few better opening lines of dialogue than, if any at all, than I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It's
Yes.
something that you hear and you want to know more. You want to hear more.
Yeah, no, I remember we were workshopping some stuff when I first got into my MFA program, and everybody always had these great opening lines. And I was never a big opening line person before that program. I was always about the start, and I look, my work before the program, and the first lines are not anything that, they're really kind of pro forma sort of thing. Um, and I opened my thesis project differently. Um, I opened it with the grandfather clock in the hallway struck four, and it was because I had seen this girl write this really impactful opening scene that started that way, and I was kind of like, I like that, and that's very evocative of the mood that I want to go into. So I kind of, stole that.
Well,
And
my
and thought I
previous
would I would begin in the same way. And the nice thing is the great thing about it is it offers a moment to get right into establishing one of the main characters. And so I care a lot about that sort of stuff now because it really does grab you.
well, my last novel before Deadpan was called Escape from Film School, and the opening it was cited by Entertainment Weekly as best opening lines in literature this week. And I'm not sure I remember it exactly, but it's something like, "I wish I had died in some Hollywoody way, metal on the highway, murder, suicide, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The sorry truth is, I choked to death on sushi." That was awarded the the best opening lines in literature some years ago.
No, no, but I mean, but again, it has that same quality of we kind of want to know, what's going on. That's and I think that's the power of, one of the great things about literature is if we were to film that idea, it wouldn't have the same impact.
Hmm.
And I've done video. I did a music film for a buddy of mine. I did a feature travel film. So when I'm writing, I kind of think in a weird way, how would I shoot this? Where would I put the camera? What would the lighting temperature be? What would the cinematography, all this sort of thing. And then I kind of position the characters where I would like where I would have liked the cameras to be. So I can give like, that, a certain perspective. But that's something where, I mean, yeah, and you could have a nice splashy, exterior day, LA skyline stock footage sort of thing, and then, have, like Seth Rogen stumble out of the Beverly Hills Polo Club choking on sushi and just like falling in the driveway. Still, and that would be incredibly funny and a great bit of film. Not the same amount of impact as the way you wrote that. That's the difference between film and literature,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm. Well, I
Um,
think literature is actually the most interactive of all media. You just have 26 figures, letters in the alphabet, black ink against a white background, usually. And what do you get out of that? You get sound, you get character, you get images, you get emotions. What I've learned over the years is that the less you say, the more engaging it is. by implying rather than expressing, you create the possibility for the reader to do what they want to do, which is to become interactive, to have the art play out where all art really belongs, which is in the head of the viewer, and you do that by the observer, and you do that by not by piling on, but by getting out of your own way.
Yeah, although I do agree with that, but however, I last night I was watching a brief video. It was about Siegfried Follies and the this huge 100-ton tiered cakes that they built for this one scene. And I have to say I miss the big Hollywood production where the set is 3 feet high. They've hired, everyone in West Hollywood and put them in a tuxedo to stand there. They've hired half the city to be extras in this movie. Um, and and just these large, grandiose things that just don't happen anymore. I think that's like the magic of like White Christmas is, they do these tremendous, wonderful dance numbers and like two cuts. Like they just did that as one thing and barely edited it. And that was like the magic thing about that from Siegfried Follies is, and I realized at the end, I'm like, that's one shot. They never cut. That's one 18-minute long sequence. They just did that. And I miss that big, grandiose old Hollywood thing. I do miss that though. And you just don't, La La Land just doesn't compete. I'm sorry, folks.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
just not the same.
I think it's self-conscious. They're bragging that they did an 18-minute piece. They're aware of what they're doing. They're trying too hard. I've preached for years and years, for decades, that you'll never succeed if you try. You got to stop trying.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, one of the things I remember, because I'm a classically trained musician, other lifetime, and I remember one of my teachers telling me late high school, um, the problem is you look like you're putting in a lot of effort. You look like you're working really hard. And I'm kind of like, because this is my autism, that would be because I am, thank you, sort of thing. And she's like, no, 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 no. The point is to be putting in a lot of effort and be working really hard, but make it look incredibly effortless.
Yes.
And at that time, I thought that notion was absurd and just absolutely crazy. Um, until years later when I realized how um incredibly important that was. And I remember I was doing I went on to play a whole bunch of musical gigs and all this type of thing. And I did stand-up comedy for a while and did local tours and was a local kind of headliner and all this type of thing. And I remember I was doing some music for some small religious service for Christmas for a friend. And someone was like, oh, and people now, of course, will walk right up and take pictures and all that. You have to keep going and not let any of this distract you. And and someone was kind of like, oh, like how long did it take you to memorize that? And I'm like, oh, I not memorized. I don't memorize music. Can't actually. My brain won't retain it. And oh, it looked like you know, you weren't reading. And I'm like, well, I have been playing this song every Christmas since I was 5. So, like, it's, but that's it, but it is, but that's the magic for them, that ability to be playing seemingly from memory, well, definitely not from memory, and all this type of thing. It was this wonderful magic because it was a lot of effort on my part, but it looked very effortless and easy and
Hmm. Hmm.
all this type of thing. Um, I always thought that was very, very interesting.
Well, it
And
demonstrates a point that I've preached for years and years. I like to say that in art, in film, um, which is what I was teaching, appearances are not important. And what I meant by that is they're not. merely important. They're the whole thing. All there is appearance. Movies don't even move. Everybody knows that it's actually many, many, many still pictures, one after the next, 24 every single second. It's all there is appearance. That's not Butch and Sundance. It's Bob and Paul. They appear to be what they are because they put on costumes and makeup. So it's all about appearance. Appearance is everything. And if you're working real hard, that's okay as long as it doesn't appear that you're working real hard, just as you say.
Yeah, no, and that is, I think, I think that is, I think there are people who can be kind of mid, but their ability to do that puts them into the category of being great. Whereas
Yes.
someone who may be more talented but doesn't have that ability will be considered a bit more, kind of mid, you know. Um, and I don't know if you watch this show, but there's a great anthology series called Feud, and they did one a couple years
Yes.
ago about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford.
Hmm.
It's I love Ryan Murphy in general, huge American Horror Story fan, love Feud, all this type of thing. And there's this great scene, Jessica Lange speaking to Susan Sarandon as Joan Crawford and Betty Davis, where she says the Academy doesn't give you awards because of your talent. They give it to you because they like to see you sweat. Because Betty Davis had more
Well, the ability to
awards than Joan Crawford.
sweat
Yes.
is talent. I would say there's great talent in that. By the way, there's another series called Feud, which my wife and I just watched about Truman Capote.
Yes.
The,
Swan,
the
so
swans,
good.
the women
Yes.
that who were his friends and companions over the years. A little uneven and inconsistent, but very, very worthy. And Tom Hollander, who plays Capote, it's uncanny. It's like Truman Capote came back to life.
Yeah. No, it is. Yeah, his performance is the best since Philip Seymour Hoffman. Absolutely. And people don't forget, Truman Capote is a very hard character to get. That's a very specific affectation. It's a very specific set of mannerisms. It's a very specific way of speaking that doesn't exist anymore, really. So you really have to go study, sort of because no one really does that anymore. So, it's yeah, no, I love my only problem with Swans is I felt like it felt a bit rushed. I feel like they ran out of time. If they'd had 6 more weeks, it would have been a better show,
Hmm. Hmm.
sort of thing. And you can sometimes tell when things get rushed out the door. But then you also have James Cameron, who spends a decade making Avatar, a film that by the time the sequel came out, we had forgotten about the first. So, oh, all right, Richard. Well, we're over the hour. Um, so now's the part of the show where we do plugs and let us know where people can find you online, where to get the book, all this sort of thing. So why don't you let us know about all that and we'll get you out of here.
Sure. Well, Deadpan is the title, the name of the book, and it's available in the usual places, Amazon, for example. What I encourage people to do is to order it from the Heresy Press directly. That's the best way to support this courageous new publisher, and you can get to them by just going to my website, richardwalter.com, and it'll there's a shopping cart link there that will take you right to Heresy, and you can order it from them. Once again, it's called Deadpan. You can get it at richardwalter.com. You can get it at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com, and even in some bookstores if you can find a bookstore.
Yes, and you have your Substack, richardwalter.substack.com. So that's super exciting. And thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.